An edge in OpenWebMind represents a connection between two nodes. What kind of connection? Well, if all we have is an edge, we can't tell. An edge between two nodes tells us that there is a connection between those two nodes, but not what kind of connection. If only we had something more than an edge, something that could tell us not only that there is a connection between two nodes, but also tell us what kind of connection it is. If only we had a hyperedge. There are 4 kinds of hyperedge in OpenWebMind. The first is the good old-fashioned edge. It represents a connection between two nodes, as I say, without telling us what kind of connection. And that's fine, as long as all we're interested in is loose association. For example, in the OpenWebMind Thinker, I can create a good old-fashioned edge from the node representing me to any other node by clicking the Add Edge button for that node. Take the node representing Canada, where I live. I can click the Add Edge button for that node to create an edge between me and Canada. This is fast, but it's loose. I'm creating an association between me and Canada. I'm not saying anything about this connection. I'm not telling you that I live in Canada, just that I'm associated in some way with Canada. The second kind of hyperedge in OpenWebMind involves 3 nodes, the 2 nodes connected by the hyperedge and a third node representing the type of connection. For example, in the OpenWebMind countries mind, there's a proximity hyperedge between Canada and Greenland. The 2 nodes connected by this hyperedge are, of course, the node representing Canada and the node representing Greenland. But there's a third node along the hyperedge, representing the concept of proximity. What this hyperedge tells us is that Canada is close to Greenland. This is a symmetrical relationship. Canada is close to Greenland, and Greenland is close to Canada. It goes both ways. You can see how simple this is as a way of saying something about a connection. There's no need to create a new thing to define the type of a connection. We can use the same thing, a node, as we use for everything else in OpenWebMind. And you can see how flexible it is. A node can represent anything, so a 3-node hyperedge can represent any type of relationship. Not all relationships are symmetrical. For example, I founded OpenWebMind, but OpenWebMind didn't found me. Such asymmetrical relationships can be represented by a third kind of hyperedge, involving 4 nodes. As ever, there are 2 nodes connected by the hyperedge, in this case the node representing me and the node representing OpenWebMind. But there are 2 more nodes involved in this hyperedge, representing the roles of the 2 connected nodes in the relationship. In this case, my role in the relationship is that of founder, and OpenWebMind's role is that of the organization being founded. So the 4 nodes that make up the hyperedge are me, founder, organization, OpenWebMind. This is a simple, flexible way to say something about a directed connection. Again, there's no need to create a new thing to define the roles in a connection. We can use the same thing, a node, as we use for everything else in OpenWebMind. And again, a node can represent anything. So a 4-node hyperedge can represent a relationship in which the nodes play any roles. Occasionally, we won't have the concepts to define an asymmetric relationship with 1 type node or 2 role nodes alone. If necessary, we can specify 1 type node and 2 role nodes in a 4th kind of hyperedge involving 5 nodes. Suppose I wanted to be more precise about the connection between me and Canada. Suppose I wanted to create a hyperedge that does tell you that I live in Canada. Clearly, this is an asymmetric relationship. I live in Canada, but Canada doesn't live in me, at least not literally. So a 3-node hyperedge, me, residency, Canada, is missing something. Sure, the type node, residency, which according to WordNet is the act of dwelling in a place, tells us that there's some living going on here. But it doesn't tell us whether I live in Canada or whether Canada lives in me. Similarly, a 4-node hyperedge, me, person, place, Canada, is also missing something. This time it's clear that I'm a person and Canada is a place, and it's clear that there's a connection between the person, me, and the place, Canada, but it still doesn't tell you that I live in Canada. To do that, I need both the type node and the role nodes, me, person, residency, place, Canada. The type node, residency, is needed to specify the type of the relationship. This hyperedge tells us that there's some living going on here. And the role nodes, person and place, are needed to specify the roles of the connected nodes in the relationship. The hyperedge tells us that someone lives somewhere, as well as the direction of the relationship. The place is Canada and the person is me. So here are the 4 kinds of hyperedge in OpenWebMind. An associative edge between 2 nodes, a hyperedge with a type node to tell us what kind of relationship it is, a hyperedge with 2 role nodes to specify the roles of the connected nodes in the relationship, and a hyperedge with a type node and 2 role nodes to tell us what kind of relationship it is and specify the roles of the connected nodes in the relationship. There's no official list of the kinds of connections you can make in OpenWebMind. You can create any hyperedges you like, using any type node and any role nodes. Sure, there are a few relationships so common that it's worth adopting a standard formulation. I'll get to those in a later video. But for the most part, you can use any node you like as the type node and any nodes you like as the role nodes. There is one principle, however, that you should bear in mind when choosing type and role nodes. Type and role nodes should be as high level as possible while remaining specific enough to define the relationship. Take the me, founder, organization, OpenWebMind hyperedge. The role nodes in this hyperedge, founder and organization, are as high level as possible while remaining specific enough to define the relationship between me and OpenWebMind. Take the founder role node. It couldn't be any higher level without losing the meaning of the relationship. For example, if I changed it from founder to person, me, person, organization, OpenWebMind, then the hyperedge would establish a connection between me as a person and OpenWebMind as an organization, but it would no longer establish whether I'm the founder, or an employee, or an investor, or an enthusiast. Or take the organization role node. It needn't be any more specific. For example, if I changed it from organization to corporation, foundation, community, or university, for example, me, founder, corporation, OpenWebMind, it would tell you what kind of an organization OpenWebMind is, but that's not the point here. The point of the hyperedge is to define the relationship between me as a founder and OpenWebMind as an organization, not to define what kind of organization OpenWebMind is, or what kind of a founder I am. Using founder and organization as the role nodes is just right. Me, founder, organization, open web mind. These role nodes are as high level as possible while remaining specific enough to define the relationship between me and open web mind. And there's one more principle to bear in mind. A hyperedge should involve as few nodes as possible while fully communicating the relationship it represents. For example, I could create a 5-node hyperedge to communicate the relationship between me and open web mind. Me, person, foundation, organization, open web mind. This hyperedge works, but it involves more nodes than necessary. The concept of a founder, which according to WordNet is a person who founds or establishes some institution, allows us to combine the concept of a person and the concept of foundation. 4 nodes are enough to fully communicate the relationship: me, founder, organization, open web mind. So go for it. Create any hyperedges you like in open web mind. Specify a type node for symmetrical relationships, or role nodes for asymmetrical relationships, or both if necessary, or neither for a loose association. Hyperedges are simple and flexible enough to represent any connection between nodes. So go ahead, connect.